Hi, this is the Apologist Bookshelf. I'm Gary Zacharias. Thank you so much for joining me today. A book by Richard Simmons is what I'd like to cover. We've done two previous podcasts on this book, and it's Reflections on the Existence of God. Richard Simmons III is the author. I'd like to look at it's 3.1. That's how he does his chapters. He breaks the chapters down into subheadings. So 3.1. And this is his introduction to the area called morality and atheism. And I think this is a really powerful argument that we can make when we're talking with people who don't believe in God. He starts off asking questions. How do we determine what's moral? I mean, if there's no God to reveal right and wrong, how do we figure it out? This is moral or this is immoral. Is it our feelings? Is it our reasoning power? So if there's no God, what's a guiding force in our lives? And he quotes Richard Dawkins. This is a pretty famous quote. And this is what Dawkins has to say, what conclusion he comes up with as an atheist. He says, in a universe of blind physical forces and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt. Other people are going to get lucky, and you won't find any rhyme or reason to it, nor any justice. The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at bottom, no design, no purpose, no evil, and no good. Nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. DNA neither knows nor cares. DNA just is, and we dance to its music. I mean, think about that. There's no evil, there's no good. We're purposeless products of evolution. So all morality is just subjective. It's kind of based on your opinion. So he says that Dawkins did an interview with Justin Brierley. By the way, everything Brierley does is excellent. He does a British interview program. I think it's called Unbelievable. And he's got a bunch of good books out and all. So Brierley was talking to Dawkins about this whole issue of human morality. So here's what he asked, or here's a statement. When you make a value judgment, don't you immediately step yourself outside of this evolutionary process and say that the reason this is good is that it's good? And you don't have any way to stand on that statement? Dawkins, my value judgment itself could come from my evolutionary past. And Brierley says, so it's just random, in a sense, as any product of evolution. Dawkins says, you could say that. Nothing about it makes it more probable than that there's anything supernatural. Brierley says, so ultimately, let's take an example. Brierley says, your belief that rape is wrong is as arbitrary as the fact that we've evolved 5 fingers rather than 6. Dawkins says, yeah, you could say that. So it's interesting, isn't it? Dawkins could not come out and say that rape was immoral. Now, he may not believe that in his heart, but he's trying to be a consistent Darwinian atheist. But Dawkins later, this is back to Simmons now, Dawkins in another spot said this, he does believe it's not good for society to follow Darwinian morality. It's ruthless. Here's what he had to say. This is Dawkins now. I've always said that I'm a passionate anti-Darwinian when it comes to the way we should organize our lives and morality. We want to avoid basing our society on Darwinian principles. Wow. So Simmons says, think about this. Dawkins, on one hand, says we just live our lives based on our DNA, and then he introduces a moral code that says don't follow your DNA. So that's pretty inconsistent, isn't it? Simmons says, let's look at somebody else, Friedrich Nietzsche, the great German philosopher. He had a lot to say about atheism and morality. He clearly said, now he being Nietzsche, he clearly stated there are no absolute rights or wrongs. So he had contempt for Christianity because it pushed ideas of love and morality and humility. He says you can't build a civilization of power on these beliefs. And he predicted, again, this is still Nietzsche, he predicted the English-speaking world would seek to abandon a belief in God, but would try to hang on to Christian values. But he was right. He predicted that when societies reject God, guess what goes away? Christian morality would disappear. So it'd be more difficult, wouldn't it, in that kind of society to motivate people to be moral? Because then they're saying, well, if there's no God, I'm just going to follow my selfish instincts and desires. All right, then Simmons goes on to discuss Dr. Arthur Leff, who's passed away, but a professor at Yale Law School. And he wrote an article, and I found that to be such an important article. I found it online and copied it off, and I will quote parts of it. It's a lengthy piece, but I'll quote parts of it when I'm speaking on this issue of morality. So back in 1979, you can look this up yourself. He has an article in the Duke Law Journal. It's titled Unspeakable Ethics, Unnatural Law. Okay, Unspeakable Ethics, Unnatural Law. Now, it's hard to tell. It doesn't sound like Leff believes in God, but what really troubled him in this article, it's very clear that if there is no God, there's no way that a person can make any kind of case for human morality at all, and even human rights. Now, here's part of what he has to say. This is from Leff now. You can say it's wrong for a majority to take advantage of any minority by force, but that's an opinion, not an argument. You can assert all sorts of things, but what you cannot do is say one point of view is morally right and all others are not. If someone says it's all right to enslave a minority and you say, no, it's wrong, who's to say your view of morality is right and theirs is wrong? Maybe it helps to frame it this way, Leff said. If there is no God, who among us gets to impose their will on everyone else? Who gets to establish the moral laws that people are to follow? And Leff concludes with this, these questions are so intellectually troubling that you would think there would be more legal and ethical thinkers trying to come to grips with this. See, that is a really powerful paragraph, I think. Once you throw God out, who gets to choose morality? Well, guess what? It's going to be the person that gets the most votes, or it'll be the person with the most weapons. So I think that's fascinating. So let's move on now. 3.2, right? So here's his next section that he talks about. Christian morality, does it really matter? And again, I really like Simmons because he goes to some interesting people to help fill in the answers to some of these questions that he's asking. So he now talks about Philip Yancey, who talks about the nature of Christianity and how different it makes a person. Here's what Yancey says. I'm a Christian not because Jesus' way benefits society, but because I believe it's true. If true, it should create the conditions in which human life works best. He says, but today, a lot of people don't buy into Yancey's view of life. They see Christian morality as being restrictive, right? It takes away your freedom. Don't be a Christian. You're going to be limited. You're going to be in a straitjacket. He said, Simmons now, he says, have you ever thought maybe Christian morality is more like an owner's manual that fits your design as a human being? If you align your life with the owner's manual, your life will flourish. That's what Yancey is saying. Now, he's got a criminologist next that he wants to refer to, Byron Johnson. He wrote a book called More God, Less Crime, subtitled Why Faith Matters and How It Could Matter More. So here's what Johnson has to say, talking about Christian morality. Religion is a powerful antidote to crime. It clearly impacts the rates of drug use, violence, and gang activity in the inner city. That's why Eugene Rivers, a pastor in Brooklyn, says, if you want to help underprivileged youth, we have two options. It's either barbed wire or more black super predators or civil society and stronger black churches. It's that simple. So I love the way he goes from person to person to give us insights into what he's talking about. A German philosopher, this is Simmons quoting Jürgen Habermas. He says, democracy requires of its citizens qualities that it cannot provide. Let me say that again, then we'll fill in what he was talking about here. Democracy requires of its citizens qualities that it cannot provide. So what's he talking about? That Habermas is saying that free societies are going to depend on their citizens to act morally and responsibly. Otherwise, they become police states, right? And says Habermas is agnostic, but he stunned colleagues when he said Western civilization and its legacy of justice and human rights are direct heirs of the Judeo-Christian values and ethics. Habermas said this, we continue to draw on the substance of this heritage. Everything else is just idle postmodern talk. Wow, that's really good. He has another story here, Dennis Prager. He's pretty well known now. His PragerU that gives all sorts of interesting short videos online that you can watch. And he's a radio talk show host, so I like Dennis Prager a lot. I like a lot of what he has to say. So he was in a debate with an atheist philosopher called Jonathan Glover. So Glover was going on and on about all the horrors of religion over the years, and you can make a pretty good case, unfortunately. But Prager asked a question to him. If you, Professor Glover, were stranded at the midnight hour in a desolate Los Angeles street, and if, as you stepped out of your car with fear and trembling, you were suddenly to hear pounding footsteps behind you, and you saw 10 burly young men who just stepped out of a dwelling coming toward you, would it or would it not make a difference to you to know that they were coming from a Bible study? And Glover conceded it would make a difference. So Simmons says, think about why it makes a difference, about how your worldview impacts the way you regard a human being. If I believe a person has great value because that person is designed in the image of God, I'm going to treat that person with dignity and respect, Simmons says. But if you see life from a godless perspective and human beings are just nothing more than a chance product of nature, well, why not take advantage of them? Yeah, mug them, steal their wallet. So Simmons says Christian virtue and morality does make a difference in a person's life and to a community where you have citizens that subscribe to a Christian worldview. You know, he doesn't quote this here, but John Adams, our second president, he said, this society, the Constitution, this American society was made only for immoral people. And he's right. Otherwise, if we don't think there's a God that reins in and holds back some of our worst instincts, you're going to need a police state to keep track of everybody, an authoritarian state. And we're starting to see that now here in America. You've got cameras on a lot of street corners and sophisticated law enforcement that has to be there. All right, so back to Simmons here. Will Durant, he's a very famous philosopher. He's an atheist. And he gave an interview with the Chicago Sun-Times. And here's what he had to say. Think about this. This guy's an atheist. He said, common people's lives will fall apart morally if they believe God does not exist. Wow. Can we say that one more time? Will Durant, atheist philosopher. People's lives will fall apart morally if they don't think there's a God. And Simmons says, this is what we're starting to see in this land, in America. It said, what's interesting is what Durant says about his own life, that he survived morally because he kept the Christian moral code that he had when he was a kid. Now, he'd gotten rid of his faith. Okay, so he didn't believe the Christian message, but he retained the morals. And here's a thoughtful observation of Durant. You and I are living on a shadow because we're operating on the Christian ethical code, which was given us infused with the Christian faith. Now, here comes Durant's interesting question, but what will happen to our children? We're not giving them an ethic warmed up with a religious faith. They are living on the shadow of a shadow. Wow, how accurate is that? That was like over 40-some years ago. And as Simmons is saying, that's hard to live on a shadow, and even more difficult in a shadow's shadow. But if you live without God, that's what's going to happen. He then quotes Lord Acton, an English historian. Now, here's what he said about the need for some kind of spiritual foundation to life. So this is Lord Acton. A person's spiritual underpinnings creates an invisible yoke of duty on every citizen. It gives a reason to deny self-interest, to obey the law, to sacrifice for others. However, when we abandon our spiritual roots, duty loses its hold on our hearts. Crime and lawlessness are then unleashed. And so as Simmons starts to wrap up this chapter here, he said that he's arguing that God has given us moral truth. Why? Because we need those in order to live a vibrant and a healthy life. Hey, by the way, can I at this point mention J. Warner Wallace has a book called The Truth and True Crime. And this is exactly what Wallace is talking about, that human flourishing happens best when people follow Judeo-Christian principles. And so that's a really good book. I've done a podcast or two on that, but that's another book that you might find really, really good. It's J. Warner Wallace, The Truth and True Crime. So let's go back to Simmons here. He said, another way to see this whole idea is to realize that God's like a doctor. He is prescribing what we need for our bodies. He's not making up arbitrary suggestions. God is telling us what to do to stay healthy. And if we fail to listen to God, we're going to risk jeopardizing our health. Just like if we ignore the doctor, we're going to jeopardize our physical health as well. He said, we've been given a moral compass. This is what Simmons is talking about. It enables us to know the path to go down. And he said, you can see that in the research of a man named Gunter Lewy, Lewy. He's an author and political scientist. He's been a faculty member at Columbia, Smith, University of Massachusetts. And back in the early 90s, he wanted to write a book on why America does not need religion. And he saw a lot of his conservative colleagues taking the position that religion was a foundation for morality and social stability. He was going to prove them wrong. So in his own words, he said, I'm going to make a defense of secular humanism and ethical relativism. In fact, he said, I'm going to prove that they're damned wrong. Okay, so pretty strong. So here's what happened to him. He did a lot of research, and the weight of the evidence caused him to change his mind. So he's got a book that came out as a result of his research. Guess what the title is? Why America Needs Religion. He argued that religion, and in particular he focused on Christianity, leads to lower rates of just about everything that we don't want in our society. We want to get rid of, and these are the areas where the Christianity and all got rid of, says crime, drug abuse, teenage pregnancy, family breakdown. So Lewy saw the positive influence Christianity made on people's attitudes and intentions. He saw over and over, he said it instilled responsibility, moral integrity, compassion, generosity. And I'm going to go back to Lewy, but I thought about something else. There's a man named Matthew Parris, Parris. He wrote an article, Why Africa Needs God. And just like this, and Why America Needs Religion. So Parris was an atheist. Is an atheist. And he said it kind of bothers him to have to say it, but he's been in Africa for years. He knows a lot about Africa. And he said it's not governmental money. It's not these non-NGOs, non-governmental organizations that come in. That's not what's going to save Africa. It's Christianity. Because he said he sees a difference in the people who are Christians. So it instills, just like Lewy is talking about, responsibility, moral integrity, compassion, generosity. So Lewy concludes in that book, Mary wrote a book, Why America Needs Religion, back to Lewy here. He said, contrary to the expectation of the Enlightenment, freeing individuals from the shackles of traditional religion does not result in their moral uplift. To the contrary, the evidence now shows clearly, here it comes, no society has yet been successful in teaching morality without religion. So Lewy has made a very strong case there that biblical morality makes a difference when it's followed in the real world. And Simmons ends the chapter by saying the only way to explain that outcome is to recognize that when people's lives are lined up with the structure of God's moral law, they're happier, and they're healthier. Yeah, amen to that. So I will stop at that point. He's got more information about morality, but I'll cover that in another podcast. Thank you so much. Hope you're having a good day, and we'll do another podcast soon.